Chapter 23 of Dyke Darrel. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Dyke Darrel, the Railroad Detective, or The Crime of the Midnight Express, by Frank Pinkerton. Chapter 23. Dyke Darrel on the Trail. The men who burst into Aunt Scarlett's room on the night that Professor Ruggles departed from the block with Nell Darrel in his arms were men of determination and friends of the detective, who had gone into the building in the disguise of an old man, for the purpose of investigating. How the investigation came out, the reader has already been informed. The report of pistols had warned Harry Bernard, the boy Paul Ender, and two officers in their company that something of an interesting nature was going on in the basement of the Scarlet Block. "Dyke is in difficulty, that is sure," cried Harry in an excited voice. "We must get inside at once." They tried the side door, to find it locked. It was through this door that they had seen the bold detective disappear, and it was in the same direction that the four men proposed to go in search of their daring friend. The room was in darkness, but Paul soon had the rays of a dark lantern flashing about the place. "Let us move with caution," said Harry, taking the lead, and entering the hall through the doorway which Ruggles, in his hasty flight, had left open. Soon voices greeted them from the basement, and a light glimmered through the half-open door at the head of the stairs. "If we could only put him under down here," said a voice which the reader will recognize as that of Nick Brower, the villainous accomplice of Professor Ruggles from the opening of our story. "Well, I reckon we can," said the villainous companion of Brower. As he spoke, he went to the side of the fallen manhunter and placed the point of a knife against his throat. "What now, pard?" "Dead men tell no tales, Nick." "True, send it home." Bang! The sharp retort of a revolver woke the echoes once more. The knife dropped from the nerveless grasp of the would-be assassin, and with a howl of pain he began dancing an Irish jig on the stone floor of the cellar. Nick Brower whirled instantly, snatched a revolver from his hip, to find that four glittering bulldogs confronted him from the stairs. "Drop that weapon, or we will drop you!" thundered Harry Bernard in a stern voice. "Trapped!" cried Brower, in a despairing voice. Then the four men moved down into the cellar and secured Brower and his companion. "We have made a good haul," said one of the police officers who accompanied Bernard and Paul, who recognized in Brower an old offender. Harry Bernard bent quickly and anxiously over the prostrate detective. "My soul!" uttered the young man, "the villains have killed poor Darrel, I do believe." But the young man's belief was unfounded, since some time later Dyke Darrel came to his senses. He was in a bad condition, however, and those who saw him predicted that the detective had followed his last trail. A search of the building brought to light Madge Scarlett, who was fuming angrily over her imprisonment. "How did this happen?" demanded Bernard, sternly, when he came to question the hag. She was sullen, however, and refused to answer. "I imagine there is a way to bring your tongue into working order," said Bernard in a stern voice. "I keep a respectable house, sir. You can't harm me." "We'll see about that." "Did you find anyone?" questioned the Jezebel in an apparently careless tone. "We have two of your friends in limbo," returned Harry. "You will find it no holiday affair to keep a house for the purpose of murder and robbery. Never mind, you need say nothing, for it will not batter matters in the least. Come," and Harry Bernard led the old woman from the cellar. A patrol wagon bore the prisoners to the lock-up, and Bernard had Dyke Darrel taken to a private hospital, where he could have the best of care. It was some days, however, before the badly battered detective came to his senses sufficiently to converse on the subject of the racket in the building on Clark Street. "My soul! Harry, has nothing been discovered of poor Nell? Was she killed?" questioned the wounded man in a voice wrung with anguish. "I don't think Nell was mortally hurt," returned Bernard in a reassuring tone, although he hardly felt hopeful himself. "If she was, why should the villains have taken her away, or the villain rather, since from your account I judge that but one of them escaped, and he the man with the red hair." "Yes, he seemed the chief scoundrel among them. I heard him called Professor Ruggles." "He is about as much a professor as I am," answered Bernard. "He is the man we want for that midnight crime on the express train. I have enough evidence now, Dyke, to prove that this man is the guilty principal, and I also believe that one of his accomplices is now in prison." "Indeed!" And then the detective groaned in anguish of spirit and body. It was hard to lay here, helpless as a child, while the fate of Nell was uncertain, and there was so much need for a keen detective to be afloat. Harry realized how his friend suffered, and soothed him as best he could. "Leave no stone unturned to find her, Harry," urged the detective. "If you do find and save her, great shall be your reward. If she is dead, then I will see about avenging the deed." "And in that you will not be alone," assured Harry Bernard, a moist light glittering in his eye. Even Dyke Darrel did not suspect how deeply his young friend was interested in the fate of Nell. The days dragged into weeks ere Dyke Darrel was able to be on his feet again. He was not very strong when he once more took it upon himself to hunt down the scoundrels who had wrecked his happy home. Even the railroad crime was forgotten for the time, so intense was his interest centred in the fate of his sister. If not dead, Dyke Darrel believed she had met with a far worse fate, and it was this thought that nerved him to think of doing desperate work should the cruel abductor ever come before him. Madge Scarlet was dismissed after an examination, but Nick Brower and his companion were held to await the action of a higher court. One morning the pallid man in a brown suit who had haunted the various depots of the city for several days made a discovery. On one of the early morning trains a man and a veiled female had taken passage east. Dyke Darrel trembled with intense excitement when the depot policeman told him of this. "Only this morning, you say?" "It was on one of the earliest trains, I believe, this morning." "A New York train?" "I am not sure. I see so many people, you know. You might inquire at the ticket office." Dyke Darrel did so. No ticket for New York had been sold that morning. Then the policeman said that it was possible he might have been mistaken as to the time. It might have been on the previous day that he saw the man and his invalid sister. "Do you know that they took the New York train?" questioned Dyke. "No, I'm not positive about that, either. You might telegraph ahead, and find if such a couple is on the train." This was a wise suggestion. Dyke acted upon it, but failed to derive any satisfaction. And there was a good reason for this, since when leaving Chicago a dark man, with smooth face and grey-tinged hair, accompanied Nell Darrel, whereas before reaching the borders of New York State, the place of this man had been taken by a man with red beard and hair, blue glasses, and a well-worn silk plug. This change disturbed identities completely. The change had been made at a way station, without causing remark among the passengers, the most of whom were not through for the great city. Once New York whelmed them, the scheming villain and poor Nell would be lost forever to the man-tracker of the West. There was a suspicion in the brain of Dyke Darrel that he scarcely dared whisper to his own consciousness. It was that Harper Elliston had had a hand in the late villainy. The detective's eyes were open at last, and he realized that his New York friend was not what he seemed. It was this fact that induced Dyke Darrel to believe that the abductor of Nell had turned his face toward the American metropolis. At once he made search for Harry Bernard and Paul Ender. Neither of them he was able to find, and he had not seen them for 2 days previous. It did not matter, however. Leaving word at the hotel that he had gone to New York, Dyke Darrel once more hastened to the depot, arriving just in time to leap aboard the express headed for the Atlantic seaboard. The train that had left 4 hours earlier was almost as fast as the one taken by the detective, so that if no accident happened to the earlier train, there could be little hope of running down his prey before New York was reached. Nevertheless, Dyke Darrel preserved a hopeful heart, in spite of the terrible anxiety that oppressed him. The woman who had but a few days before been released from prison was destined to complicate matters and bring about startling and unexpected meetings, as the future will reveal. When night fell, Dyke Darrel found himself yet hundreds of miles from the goal of his hopes and fears. End of chapter 23.